Alrighty. Hi there. So we are all set to get going. Thank you all for joining us. First things first, we've got the session links. They're linked on the front slide. That should be what's on everybody's screen right now. If for some reason you can't get to that when you try the link out, just pop it into the chat window and we'll get it all squared away for you. So today we are very excited to be talking to Cynthia Brady. She is a middle school teacher in Loudoun County, and we're going to hear about her experiences working on computer science in the middle school. As we're going, we've got a set of questions that we'll be going through, but as we're working, if anything pops up that you'd like to ask, just pop it into the chat window and we'll try to fit it in before we're done today. Alrighty. So Cynthia, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. I'm glad the weather finally is kind of cleared up. It's like it's actually spring out there. All right.
Pretty cold up here in Loudoun today.
Oh no. Are you all getting the wind also?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, it's been funny. We're on Broad Street in downtown Richmond, so it's like when people have been blowing by our front window all day. But I am thankful to get a little bit of sun finally. All right. So Cynthia, I was going to start out today with just having you tell us a little bit about your background. What are your endorsements? Where do you teach? All the details.
Okay. I am a career math teacher. I have taught every grade level from kindergarten through 12th grade. I did Montessori Elementary. I was a math resource teacher in elementary. I've taught high school courses from the class you have to take in California to get a diploma all the way up to honors math analysis. And currently I teach in a middle school. I was a middle school math teacher, and then I got this amazing opportunity to create a middle school coding course for one of the schools here in Loudoun County, and I jumped on board, and here we are.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you have a deep working knowledge of each of the different grade bands. I think we hear a lot about teachers sometimes hopping between subjects, but we don't often find folks that will try like elementary or high school, hopping back and forth. I know I taught high school for a long time, and I think elementary would scare the bejeebies out of me.
And the elementary teachers would say the same thing about high school.
I am sure, but it's the perfect bridge for middle school, because depending on what day of the week it is, sometimes you get kiddos that show up that are still in elementary, and sometimes they think they're in high school already. So
definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good experience going into this. So I thought we'd start off with just talking a little bit about this particular project. It's such an exciting thing that your district did of trying to create this elective. So if you could just sort of talk about kind of where it came from and what preparation did you put into sort of getting going here?
Well, the beginnings of this was a group of teachers out at the middle school that I teach at that asked the principal, why don't we offer any computer science to our students? And the idea just really struck him, and this same group of teachers brought in some technology teachers, and what they wound up doing is creating a 10-lesson module to embed in the 6th grade keyboarding class.
Oh, wow.
So it started as something they called CAM 6, which was coding at the middle school for grade 6. And it's just these 10 drop-in lessons that are student-driven, so they kind of move through the projects at their own pace and at their own level. And it became so popular that the school began to see a need for a next course. So many parents and students were saying, we want more of this. And so the job got posted as a half-time coding position that needed math licensure. And I jumped on board, not knowing anything about teaching coding in middle school. So I learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, and I love the idea of sort of taking, I think a lot of districts are really struggling with this right now, especially at the middle and high school area. How do we fit this? Our schedules are packed. It's not like anybody's sitting around with just hours of time that students aren't busy. So how do we start to fit this in? And so that seems like such a creative solution, working with a keyboarding class that already existed and creating out those modules. And you can just really see how that grew from there.
Yeah, it started that way because the team that wanted it to happen said, where do we already have the kids sitting in front of computers? And that was the obvious answer.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, and I think sometimes, we get so, so caught up in sort of what a cookie cutter solution should look like, but every district and every school in the state is very, very different. So that's a great question to start with. Like, where are the students? Where are they in front of computers? And make it work from there. That's fantastic. So before we get into like the nuts and bolts of what you cover in the class, I think a lot of folks that are interested in doing this at the middle school level are curious to sort of think about middle schoolers as learners. So I thought we'd start off with talking about what can you share? And I think your wealth of experience from kindergarten through graduation really helps here. So what can you share about how middle school students learn and what's important for teachers and I think schools and divisions to know as they start to build those computer science opportunities? Are there any sort of gotchas that they need to keep in mind with this age group?
Well, with my experience, I knew that walking into a classroom that's 84 minutes and parking 7th grade boys in front of computers was not going to be a good idea. First of all, it's not good for them, and a lot of them just don't have that kind of attention, although we're working on perseverance. It didn't seem like a good idea. So right from the beginning, I used my experience as a math teacher to build in a structure into the course. So the course is the same every single day, just the content changes. So we start with a problem of the day every single day, and it could be a coding activity, a computational thinking activity, it could be some kind of algebraic thinking puzzle from math, something to get them thinking. And I've learned over the past 3 years that I can tie every puzzle or problem that I find back to computer science. So it always opens it up to a discussion. Follow the problem of the day that kind of gets them talking and comfortable and thinking. We follow that with what we call a mini lesson. And that takes a lot of different forms. Sometimes that's me sharing something with them. Sometimes we look at a video and discuss it. Sometimes other students come up to the board and share something that they know or something they learned or something they think everyone else would find helpful in whatever project we're working on. And then here's the part that everyone always talks about. After the mini lesson is a brain break. And this is my opportunity to have the kids turn off their screens, stand up, and we do an activity. Sometimes it's unplugged activities, sometimes it's circuitry, sometimes it's playing games that really tap into the reasoning that they need for computer science. And then following that, we have a 30 to 40 minute block of time that they actually work on their computer science coding projects. And they need that sustained time to log back into their game and see where they are and go, oh yeah, this is what I'm working on, get feedback from each other and so on. And then we always end with an exit ticket so that I can plan what we need to look at in the next class.
So it sounds to me, and it sounds to me that this is basically the kind of structure you would use in any well-designed course. All of those are activities that you could walk into a foreign language classroom or a English classroom or a history classroom and see similar types of activities happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the pieces where we hear a lot as teachers are starting to design out classes, especially for the first time. You take computers and science, which, I think a lot of people find a little bit daunting by themselves and combine it, and that makes it really scary. But good teaching is good teaching. We all know how to run our classrooms. We all know how to design those different activities, do those formative assessments, all the pieces that you put in every day. You're just basically layering in the computer science topics.
Yes.
And so, yeah. And so I think that's something I think a lot of folks will be really relieved to hear is this doesn't need to be, you're never going to put middle school people or even high school people sitting for 84 minutes straight just coding. That's not the way to teach the material. It's not the way they're going to learn. And frankly, you make yourself miserable because it's a lot of wiggling that happens.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine trying that. I taught high school. So it's an opportunity to really try out a lot of different learning activities. And it sounds like really help them make those connections. All right. So I'm curious, since you've been doing this for 3 years now, what kind of coding experience do your students come in with?
Well, I have the students whose only experience is with Scratch in the 10 lessons that they took at Cam 6. I have students that transfer into the county mid-year that have never done any computer science at all. And I have students that could teach this class and the 5 ones that would come after that. They can run circles around me. The way I've approached all of this is I think of myself as their coach, and they're my team of programmers, and there's a lot of differentiation. All my projects are open-ended. I try to meet kids where they are. I try to design things that anyone can be successful at, and I have the newbies doing the very basics as they're teaching themselves how to use Scratch, to the kids that go home and work on it for 10, 20 hours a week and make amazing creations. And the beautiful thing that I've discovered is the kids are so supportive of each other being at different levels. They acknowledge it. They want to teach each other. They want to learn from each other. And their favorite thing in the world is to get up in front of the class and show everyone what they made. And so it's been just an amazing experience.
I think that's one of the things that's always so incredible with these classes is the kids really get so, and it doesn't matter where their background is, they get so excited. And, you know, the idea that kids are enthusiastic about getting up and presenting to the class is sort of mind-blowing, because in a lot of classes
Yes.
that definitely is not true. You know, and I think this is one of the things that universally, I know here we've trained almost 2,000 teachers in computer science all the way from elementary through high school. Universally, this is something I think every teacher is going to face, because you know, you have that student who's been to game programming camp for years and years and years. Maybe their mom's a software engineer. They have come in with this enormous, great body of knowledge and certainly know more than us as professionals do sometimes. And then again, that student that comes in the middle of the year and just got transferred and you have to make it work. And there's so many really wonderful opportunities for that differentiation. And I love hearing that those projects are open-ended. Do you find that with those open-ended projects that, I'm just thinking about my own classes when I was teaching. My first couple years of teaching, I wasn't great with the open-ended. I tended to do the rubric where this is exactly what you need to do to get 100. And then that little turkey who knew way more than I was ever going to know and still knows more than I know would finish it like 15 minutes, and the rest of the class needed like a week and a half. So I'm curious what your experience is in pacing with the open-ended projects, how that kind of works out with what you're doing with them.
Well, every year I get a little bit better at it. I'm a work in progress. But what I'm finding to be extremely helpful this year is peer feedback. So we're doing peer review. And so the kids that whip it out in 15 minutes, one of the questions that their peers have to answer for them is, what else could you do with this project to make it better? And then they have to act on that. So the kids that are trying to get out of it quickly are having their neighbor next door say, you know, that's pretty good, but it would be so much better if you added this. And then they're back in it working on it again. And that gives the time needed for the other kids that work a little more slowly or more methodically to catch up. And I'm doing much better this year keeping them together using that peer feedback component.
That's amazing. And I think the thing that's wonderful about that too is this is sort of the experience of a really, you know, experienced classroom teacher. It's one of those things, you know, if you or I walked over and said the exact same question, it's just your teacher nagging, but having a peer, it's not that I'm not fascinating, but that's so sneaky to have their classmates do it, because they buy in and they listen to that a lot more sometimes than when we make well-meaning suggestions. So I love that question though. That's a great way. It's just such a great like nudge. And are you finding that that's keeping the kids like over time more engaged as you're going throughout this year?
Well, definitely, because they don't see me as their audience anymore. They see their classmates as their audience, and everybody wants to impress the rest of the class with what they've done. And they are always going for the likes and the loves on the Scratch platform. So definitely it's motivating for them.
That's fantastic. Well, and it's very true that when their audience is each other, they do definitely care a lot more about what they're putting out than when us grown-ups are the not so exciting audience. All right, so I think you've actually already talked a lot about this one, but I'm curious what kind of strategies, if there's anything else that you do in terms of thinking about the fact that you've got a diverse set of learners. This is an elective, and so you know, I know we always get kids from a lot of different kinds of backgrounds and just prior knowledge and everything. So what are some of the strategies you try?
Definitely pairing kids and having them work in small groups. I am always trying to come up with new activities that kind of tap into the different modalities of learning. So sometimes it's video, and sometimes it's audio, and sometimes it's hands-on to try to reach everyone. Probably the most effective strategy has been having the students mentor each other. The student that knows a lot loves to talk about what they know, and the students who don't know as much seem to feel much more comfortable learning from their peers than they do from me, although I always have a few that really want my attention during the class. That's probably been most effective. By using Scratch as the platform, it's been a very easy entry point for everyone because it's very self-explanatory, and it also encourages that experimentation. And once kids start experimenting, they're teaching themselves, and I think that is something that allows for that differentiation very well.
That's great. And it's something, especially I think with electives, we all kind of struggle with. It's hard when you've got just that wide, and I think with computer science classes, sometimes you have it on two axes. So you have sort of the normal, and my background is also I was a math teacher, and so you have students that maybe work a little bit more slowly or need more repetition before they understand things, and then students that pick things up a little bit more quickly. And again, math teacher, I make everything a Cartesian grid. If you think about the other axis, then that other access is also their prior experience in computer science. And because this currently is not something that most students are experiencing regularly, that makes that a really challenging moving target. So, all right. So this is something we get asked a lot about electives, and just curious, how are students recruited or how are they assigned to the course?
Well, this is another thing that is evolving in the program. When it started, it was all driven by the principal calling parent meeting, explain to the parents what the new course would be, and it was really driven by the administration. This year, what I did is I had a small group of students visit every keyboarding course so that they saw every single sixth grader, and they shared a project that they had made in Scratch. They shared their program that ran a Finch robot, so they had the robot running around in the class, and then they did a Q&A for the sixth graders. And by having students go around and advertise and say, look what we're doing in this class and look how much fun we're having, actually the enrollment numbers are up for next year, even though the incoming class will be smaller. So we're finding great success with, again, using the students to drive the program.
That's fantastic. And I think, thinking ahead, because, right now in state, we have the highest concentration of jobs in computer science in the country. And that doesn't include even cybersecurity and some of the other areas. We have this enormous, the data pool, depending on what time of the year, it can be between about 38 and 44,000 open jobs in the computer science fields. And so if we think about a lot of these students are getting captured early, they're really excited about this. But that collaboration piece, I think traditionally is something that the CS Ed community, and I'm saying this as a person who did this, I'm not pointing the finger, this was me. We used to have them working very much in isolation. This is your project, working solo. And I love the fact that with this age group, you're bringing in the peer coding and the collaboration and letting them do the peer review, sell the program to other students, because that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback as an education community we've gotten from the professional world of software developers, that in software development, this idea that you're a solo coder and working on your own really doesn't exist anymore. You're working on these collaborative teams. You have members that aren't all just coders, so you have to be able to communicate with people that don't have an enormous amount of computer science background. So it sounds like from the very beginning, your students are really getting prepared for the way the workforce actually works. That idea of peer review and collaboration and being on a team really sets them up well if they decide to pursue this as a career. So it's just fantastic to hear, because that's really, it's been something for the last several years we're hearing from universities and business and industry down, that this is a change that needs to happen for kids. So fantastic. All right, so you've already answered a little bit of this, but what languages are you currently using? And then we'll talk a little bit about what topics do students just roll with and catch on to, and then which ones might they struggle a little bit more with? I know sometimes when we make predictions about those things, we're not always right on. So I'm curious what you've learned around that.
Well, in 3 years, we've used 3 different models. The part that's been the same is we start with Scratch in the fall, and the first semester that runs through the middle of January has been entirely in Scratch. And I find that about that time, some of the students are kind of chomping at the bit to do something else, and a lot of them are asking for text-based programming. And because it's an elective and students are coming in at all different levels, it was really important to make the course seamless as we transition from Scratch, but also meaningful. So we attempted to use scalable game design in that transition the first 2 years and had mixed results. And this year we are using Codesters and transitioning into Python. So what we're learning from this is that the Scratch is very easy for them to pick up in the experimentation part, and that is leading them into being comfortable transitioning into Python because they're willing to experiment. But what we're finding is that the kids are getting really good at designing sprites and creating movement, but some of the heavier computational thinking concepts are more difficult for them to pick up as we're moving into Python. So we're finding that even students who are in Algebra 1 are struggling with the concept of variable. So we know that we need more support there in helping students understand variables. They're also struggling with lists and arrays and kind of how you deal with data. So again, a work in progress. We're kind of discovering this year as we work in Python that although they were able to muddle their way through in Scratch with experimentation, they're not necessarily picking up these more advanced concepts through that experimentation, and they're going to need probably some direct instruction there to support them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense, especially, again, thinking about it from a math background. We know sort of during that age range that abstract thinking is something that doesn't necessarily click in very early for a lot of people. I know we're still struggling with it some as they sort of exit through high school, and those types of things, that idea of a variable representing a spot in memory, and especially when you start getting to arrays where you have a whole list of spots in memory. Sorry, this is my array thing that just happens to be on my desk. But thinking about those kinds of concepts, those are hard all the way through when I've taught, juniors and seniors in high school and even adjuncted at the university level. Like, those are really hard concepts for, I think, folks in general when they begin coding. So it totally makes sense that kids at that age range would struggle with that a little bit. And I think especially when we think about variables, there are a lot of places where they learn about variables elsewhere. So variables they've been learning about in both math and science since elementary school. And so, we know just from talking with a lot of teachers that that's an area where there's potentially a lot of confusion just because of vocabulary and things like that. So I'm curious, are there any things that you're doing around sort of those areas where the coding concept is kind of abstract and a little hard for them to grasp onto? Are there things that you're doing that are helping them to kind of make those a little bit more concrete?
Well, definitely making use of unplugged lessons, some from csunplugged.org, some from code.org, and some that I've created on my own. I'm trying to bring in, like you said, that tangible hands-on component. We recently did some sorting algorithms where students held numbers that were printed on paper, and we went through some sorting algorithms which involved actually sorting human beings. And I heard a lot of, oh, I get it now kind of ideas. The next step from that is then to try to link it back to writing loops and making sense of the conditionals. And they still struggle there, but they have a better idea of the structure that they're going for by actually acting things out.
Yeah. Well, and that's just so important in general. I think anytime that they can sort of visualize it a little bit, it sinks in, and it's funny, there's a lot of discussion happening around this in CS Ed in general. And, and this is a lot at the university level, but it definitely applies here too. Let's say you're teaching a Python class as a CS 101 type of class. One of the issues we have in computer science is we're teaching the language and the concept at the same time. Whereas in other subject areas, they're coming in with more sort of prerequisite knowledge sometimes. And so you're not having to start off with the concept of what is mathematics while you're teaching them algebra. They already have some sense of what math is about and those type of basic pieces. And so it is a little bit difficult right now because it's a lot, just cognitive load wise, it's a lot to sort of take on. So those sound like great strategies though, in terms of getting them physically moving too. Again, that helps with their middle school wiggles also. I'm curious too, are there any topics that are particularly like you were shocked or surprised that were just like, oh wow, they got this really fast. I thought this was going to be really, really hard, and bam, they've got it. We're ready to move on.
It's interesting because the subject that comes to mind when you ask that question is the binary number system. So I teach the binary number system to them because they come across it. It's interesting and it's accessible to them because they are working on exponents in their math class. And every single year that I've taught it, the kids have loved it. And they are so proud that they understand how it works. And the comment across the board is, this is really easy. Can we do more like this? Wasn't so easy when we tried to move into hexadecimal, but they got the concept. So that was really surprising and very empowering to them to feel like they could really understand some of the math behind computer science.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, there's sort of that question of like, why are we so excited about binary? And that's part of why too. And I think as they grow in their skill set, understanding all the computer could do is move those little tiny bits around. That's really all that's happening in there. It really, when you look at just the machine architecture, it's a very small set of things it even does inside there. And we have tricked these machines into doing, the fact that you and I are on a video talking, it probably would take me at least 3 hours with traffic to drive to your house and have this conversation in person. And we certainly wouldn't be blasting it across the internet. Like the number of things that we have tricked these machines into doing when all they do is basically little tiny on-off switches is just incredible. So I love, personally, binary is one of my favorites. So I love that they're so excited about it. And it's one of those things too, just again, my inner math teacher geeking out a little bit. There's so many fun games and ways that you can approach it. So it sounds like they're having a good time with that.
Definitely.
All right. So I know you've talked a little bit about this, but so there's obviously coding. So you talked about your 30-minute block a day of coding, but what non-coding computer science topics are you also incorporating in your courses?
Well, my background in computer science was in both hardware and software. So I'm really interested in including the hardware component. So my principal purchased snap circuit sets for us. So frequently the brain break is assignments using snap circuits. And so we've talked about circuitry and components of circuitry, and that brings in the binary again. So they're also getting some exposure to how computers are even built and how circuits are built. So that's one thing we do. I also bring in a lot of guest speakers. I'm constantly reaching out to businesses and parents that are connected anyway to technology to come in and talk to the kids and share their work. And frequently that isn't necessarily coding, but the use of technology, the application of the technology. Lots of people work with software engineers, even though they don't themselves participate in the programming. They talk frequently about how important it is to have an understanding of the programming so that you can do your job in connection with the software engineers. So those are two components that I think really enhance and round out the course and keep it age appropriate.
Yeah. Well, and thinking too about like sort of that focus in middle school on starting, just as baby steps of starting to think about careers. When we talk about those 44,000 software engineering jobs, that doesn't include other domains that use computer science. So getting to talk to professionals that are in fields where it's influenced by technology, I think is so important at that age range because they can really start to imagine different things that they want to do. And then at the same time, just like, you've got the software side of it, there's a huge amount of opportunity on sort of that hardware networking design piece also. So I love the idea that they're not just getting pushed towards sort of this one endpoint, but they're seeing sort of the breadth of this and how many different opportunities and really able to imagine themselves. So as you've been talking, I've just, for folks kind of following along at home, I've been plopping some of those resources into the notes page. So I've got links to all of those. One I'm adding, you may not have used this, but for folks who may not be able to get like a snap circuit kit, since there's a cost involved, one of the things we use sometimes in our high school classes, it's called Logically, and the link is there. And that's actually a circuit simulator. So you can actually like click the little circuits together visually. They've got there's a paid version that's if you're going to be like a computer engineer for this age range, you certainly don't need that. So they have a free simulator online. So if someone's following along at home and may not be able to get the physical kits, that's another way that you might be able to experiment some with the kids. All righty. So I think you've actually done a lot of this, but I know when I was putting this slide in, it's like, I bet this will come up before we get to it, but just in case, I didn't want to forget. So it sounds like, though, you're really leaning heavily on the CS Unplugged activities and also designing some of your own. Do you have any other ones that you've designed yourself that you found really, really help with this age range?
During the first semester, one of the projects is to create an interactive maze in Scratch that is run like a game. They add things like enemies and obstacles and portals to make it an extended maze more than a paper and pencil maze. And I did some research into the mathematics behind creating what's called a perfect maze, which has one route between every two cells. And so I created grids and cut up pipe cleaners so that the kids could simulate what a computer would do to create a randomly generated maze. This year I haven't seen it, but the first year that I shared that activity, I actually had an amazing student who went home and programmed Scratch to draw randomly generated mazes, and every board was perfect. So he used that concept that we had done with putting down little pieces of pipe cleaners and picking them up as if we were a computer running an algorithm, and he actually programmed it and put it into practice. So that involves some research on my part to learn about maze theory because I didn't know anything about it. But once you're thinking about how could I show this to kids, it came pretty naturally to be able to create an activity that was accessible to them.
That's incredible. And I'm just thinking, like, I can't even begin to think about how you would actually the fact that he went home and coded that is just our problem is we're spending too much time like folding laundry and doing grown-up stuff.
Yeah.
All the boring things. And it's interesting too, because when you think about like Sudoku problems in the newspaper and those types of problems, and then you get into the actual profession of like logistics and those types of things, all of those all of those things are so interconnected. So it sounds like a fantastic project. And I'm literally, my jaw dropped when you said he went home and programmed it in Scratch. So yeah, my brain is sort of like, how on earth would you even start that? So it sounds like a lot of work went into that, but that's fantastic. And I love, again, that idea of anytime you can make something physically concrete, it does give them that spark where sometimes they can just visualize it. And that's where you can almost see it happen where they're starting to be able to think in code a little bit. You start to put those pieces together, which is so exciting. All right, so this is the last question we have for the webinar. And like I mentioned at the beginning, for the folks that have joined us since we started, if you do have any questions you'd like us to go over before we end, you can just plop them into the chat window. But I'd love to hear, we've heard about a lot of great strategies and what you've learned along the way and how you've sort of adapted as you all have grown the program. But I'd like to hear a little bit about why you think it's important for computer science to be included at the middle school level.
Well, first and foremost, it's hard to think of a career in the future that isn't somehow touched by computer science. Our cars, our homes, our lives are impacted by computer science every single day. And as we go forward, we don't even know what jobs are in the future, but I'm certain that computer science is going to be a component, whether it's big or small. So it's important to start opening the eyes of our students to this area so that they can start to educate themselves and make choices in high school of courses that not only fit what they're interested in, but can also make them employable when they come out of school. So that's kind of the major reason. This class is so much more than just computer science, though. Recently, we've been talking about whose responsibility is for students to learn. Because in my class, you're expected to try things, to look things up. If you don't know how to do something, I'm frequently telling the kids, well, did you Google it and see if there's a blog about how to do this something? You know, so I think it really is teaching them to own their own learning and to utilize those skills that they've kind of grown up with technology in their hands, of being able to go out and get answers, but now apply it to actually learning something and producing something with that knowledge. I don't see a future for these kids that doesn't involve those skills. So to expose them at middle school gives them an opportunity to make really informed decisions about their high school courses.
Yeah. Well, and just that power of really being able to steer your own learning. I think that's something, especially at the middle school level, that they don't naturally think, they don't think about themselves that way. And going back to what you were talking about earlier with that persistence piece, that's my experience of 12 and 13-year-olds is that's not something that's sort of always baked in at that age. And, you know, for most of the students you're talking about, the jobs that they're likely to be in by the time they're graduating from high school and then college and beyond, a lot of those jobs don't even exist yet. The fields are changing so quickly right now. We cannot even imagine. You know, I was talking to someone the other day. My sister is, she does user experience design for a data security company. And, you know, when she was going through college, even that wasn't a thing. It just didn't exist when we were all in school. And so to think about how much more rapidly that's even changing for our students. So that idea that they're going to have to really lifelong be responsible for their own learning as these career paths adapt and change, I think is just an incredibly powerful thing. So thank you for everything you've done to put this together, because it's very, very important for our students. And, you know, I know realistically that not every student in your class may be coding for the rest of their life, even though that kind of breaks my heart. I want them coding all the time. But you know, just thinking about that experience of the collaboration that they've built working with other students, learning to work on a team and give positive and yet constructive feedback to each other, and really that persistence of, I can do this, I can try it again, doesn't matter if it's not working right now, I can get there. And then again, that personal responsibility for their learning lifelong is just incredibly, incredibly powerful. So I appreciate everything you all have done with the course. I know a lot of folks are probably going to want to learn from your experiences. We're seeing a lot of uptick in interest at the middle school level for these coding electives, especially with the SOLs going into place from kindergarten through 8th grade. You know, I think as kids get more and more access to it in the earlier grade levels, there's going to be more and more interest, especially at the middle school, to do a deeper dive and really deepen those skills. So. All right. Okay, just checking the chat window real quick, and it looks like we do not have any questions. Final call. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to pop back real quick to the front page because I know we had a couple folks pop in after we started. So the session links are right there. It's also in the chat window in case you need it. And then all of the different resources that Cynthia mentioned that she's using, the Codesters piece, and then some of the other tools they brought in are there in the resources for you. If you have any questions as you're going, because I know this is a place where a lot of schools are really starting out and starting to build these programs. So if you have any questions or need support, you can always reach out. We've got a lot of great folks like Cynthia around the state who've been doing fantastic things. So there are a lot of models for what this can look like. And I think we're just very fortunate that we've got folks like Cynthia out there doing these things. So we've got a community that we can really learn from. You know, I've mentioned this in a lot of the other webinars that we've done, but Virginia is the first state to have this mandate going in from kindergarten through middle school. And we're already seeing that causing more of an uptick in interest. So you all are definitely ahead of the curve, but we have a lot of folks following behind you. So Cynthia, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I know it's probably a wiggly time of the school year. Every time it starts to get sunny and warm, they start getting spring fever a little bit. So when do you all actually get out of school this year?
We are done on, I believe, June 13th, so we got a ways to go.
Okay. All right. So you've got 2 more good solid months. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate
Thank you.
everybody being here. And again, we'll be posting this for folks and emailing that out. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.